Welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolf here, joined today by Evan Dammarell of the Locked On Cavs podcast to get into the newest Knick. Dylan Windler going to get the scouting report on why, if he can get over some chronic injury issues, he might be a huge steal for the Knicks this year. Plus, we talk about those Donovan Mitchell rumors that have been once again swirling around him and the Knicks this offseason. So that's coming up next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks, and I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in sights and sounds on YouTube. I appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that notification bell on YouTube or the auto download function on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can be in every day. We are here for you guys 5 days a week. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And as I said, joined by Locked On Cavs co-host Evan Dammarell. No point in holding things up any further. Let's get right into it. All right, it's crossover time. Perhaps after the playoffs, one of the most common Locked On Knicks and probably Locked On Cavs crossovers that we do, the storied, fabled Locked On Knicks, Locked On Cavs crossover. And as usual, more things to talk about between these two teams. I'm Alex Wolf. He's Evan Dammarell of the Locked On Cavs podcast, me of the Locked On Knicks podcast. And I don't know, Evan, there's like a somewhat small news item that maybe we should talk about first because it's the one substantial thing that's happened in the last week, like one on paper real thing that's happened, and that's Dylan Windler signing with the Knicks. And sort of seems like he has a little bit of a complicated past with the Cavs over the last 4 years. Drafted in the 2019 class with the 26th overall pick, didn't play his whole first year, and then has played sparingly in 3 years since. His second year, I guess technically his rookie year on the books, was the season that he played the most and was arguably the most effective, and then dwindled down to only playing 3 games this past season, which I'm kind of curious to hear if that was more about the injuries, which it seemed like he was consistently injured, or about just not being able to see the floor on a better team. But I don't know. I guess I'll just start. How would you open talking about Windler's time on the Cavs and what sort of he leaves behind there?
So there's always going to be a great what if because Shams Charania rushed to Twitter to share that originally the Cavs took Keldon Johnson with the 26th overall pick, and then he recanted it, saying, oh, no, they're going with Belmont, Dylan Windler with the 26th overall pick. This is the draft that they took Darius Garland at 5, Windler at 26, and they traded up to get Kevin Porter Jr. at 30. So maybe the late 20s picks and the guy at 30 just didn't work out for Cleveland, but I think that's also just the nature of the beast when you're rebuilding. But for Windler, when you look at what he was as a player, and I actually did a feature on him heading into his rookie season after he settled down in Cleveland, just like what he envisions himself being. He grew up a huge fan of LeBron, so he said it was kind of like a full circle moment for him just to kind of play for arguably one of his favorite teams growing up, because he wasn't a huge Pacers fan. He was more of a Cavs guy just because LeBron is LeBron. And, you know, I get it as someone who also grew up as a LeBron fan, but he has an interesting path where he considered playing golf professionally for a little bit. That was one of his choices when he was deciding colleges. Like, do I want to pursue a career in basketball, or do I want to use a college scholarship to play golf and maybe do that professionally as well? If you look it up, I believe Bally Sports Ohio still has the video up, but he does trick shot videos where he just does really unorthodox swinging motions and things like that, and just can drive it super clean, like a professional level player. And I'm envious because his swing looks similar to mine when he does that, but still hits it perfectly. But more than that, you look at Windler, and I asked him, like, what player do you remind yourself of the most? He's like, well, I'll be honest. I was a senior at Belmont. No, I'm not going to be like a superstar, but like I want to be like a Joe Ingles type player. When if you look at the stats from his time at Belmont, it made sense. He's like, I can pass the ball a little bit. I can always get better at that. I can shoot the basketball. I'm a bigger forward who can play the 3 or the 4. I can rebound, and like that was the biggest thing with Windler is like he averaged 13-ish rebounds a game his senior season at Belmont, and like that's the thing that stuck out. He's like, yeah, I can just get second chance opportunities or just use my size as like a bigger forward, whether it's at the 2, the 3, or the 4. And I said, yeah, man, that sounds awesome. And then he had a lot of intrigue, and as you mentioned, he didn't play at all his rookie season. The biggest like claim to fame, quote unquote, of his was during Salt Lake City Summer League when John Beilein was the head coach of the Cavs. Windler ripped a shot from almost half court, and he sank it against the Spurs to heading into heading into halftime rather. And a lot of people are like, okay, maybe this kid can shoot it. The Cavs have a vision here, like they got a wing that can shoot. Maybe he can be an Ingles like player, but he, I believe, at that time had a stress fracture in his leg, I want to say, and a lot of people were wondering, did John Beilein run him into the ground too hard? He was trying to run 2 days during summer league and things like that, or I don't know. It's reckless to speculate. I think it's fair to question it just when you look at his trajectory as a player, but this is unfortunately where the path and story of Dylan Windler kind of starts and continues with the Cavs. Like you said, his pseudo rookie season, technically year 2 on his contracts, or on his contract. He played really well. This was not for a great Cavs team. This is still this Cavs team is feeling itself out. I can't remember if Kevin Porter was traded to the Rockets quite yet, but it was just a weird time in Cleveland, and Windler was a guy where you're like, okay, the Cavs have a clear need at small forward. They clearly have some spacing issues. Dylan Windler is a guy that makes sense, especially when you just like look at Joe Ingles at his peak and like what he was doing with Donovan Mitchell and the Jazz at the time. Like, yeah, there could be something there, but it was like a small, long road to recovery. And then whenever he would play, he would suffer some type of minor setback, and then he would battle his way back to the court, then play for a little bit, then suffer another minor setback. And it was just kind of that awkward back and forth his rookie season. And you felt bad. You could tell like it was frustrating. It was hard for him. And then his technical sophomore season, third season in the NBA, hardly played at all, mostly spent most of his time in the G League with the Charge just because he suffered another, I believe this time was a knee injury that just set him back further and further. And again, it was just like his technical rookie season. Like he would ramp up production and then suffer another setback, and then ramp up production and suffer a setback. And then this is when the Cavs had Evan Mobley at this point, and this is when they're starting to become a bit of a better team. So the Cavs couldn't afford to find minutes in the rotation for Windler or just kind of work on a rehabilitation project when Evan Mobley just completely expedited the timeline a little bit and just never gave like players like Windler or even Isaac Okoro to an extent to at least Okoro is available the opportunity to play. And so he spent a lot of the time in the G League. I think it was just like I picked JV Bickerstaff's brain a lot about this. He's just like, listen, Dylan is a good player. I think he needs to just kind of find his footing back on the floor. He needs to trust his body again, kind of get over those mental hurdles and everything. And he played well for the Charge. He was playing under Dan Giroux at the time, and it was a similar case to this last season with the Cavs as well. And the real kicker of it all is, one, JB Bickerstaff said he was in the mix for the starting small forward spot the year Donovan Mitchell comes to Cleveland. And two, during his lone, I believe, media availability as a member of the Cavs, it was media day. He said, "This is the healthiest I've ever felt in my entire career." A few weeks later, he suffers another injury setback, and it's just that song and dance of ramping him back up and then another setback, and then it's just like you didn't hear about anything from him for a while. And then he went down with the Charge. You could see clearly there were signs of rust, and just like the lack of consistent playing time over several years is just, it stunk. And there's something there, and we could talk about this again more in a second, because like the idea of Dylan Windler makes a lot of sense as a player, but it's just injuries just kept getting in his way. And I think about it a lot. Like physically, clearly he's showing like the desire and the drive to keep getting back on the court, but like mentally, how many more hurdles and roadblocks can you just surpass? Like, I don't know if my listeners or your listeners, even you know personally, like if you suffer like an injury in sports, like 90% of the recovery is physical. Well, like that 10%, it's a big 10%, is that mental edge to like trust your body. And then if you keep dealing with setback after setback, or like you just keep getting hurt in random ways, like it gets frustrating. You have to realize, is this worth it after a while? But that was the tricky part of it all, is just like he then was an unrestricted free agent this offseason. The Cavs didn't extend a qualifying offer to him because it's just an unfortunate reality of the situation. He couldn't stay healthy. He couldn't carve out a spot in this rotation. As you had mentioned, this Cavs team is much, much better now with one, Evan Mobley, but now that Donovan Mitchell's here, and it really just changes expectations. Like they don't have the time or the ability to give Dylan Windler that opportunity to rehab and just keep growing as a player. They could have maybe signed him to a two-way deal, but all their two-way contracts were locked up, and I think the Knicks being able to circumnavigate that is really clever, but it's a shame. And people always like joked like the idea of Dylan Windler is like the most potent player for this Cavs team. He could be everything they need. And at this point, yeah, I hope he does flesh out as a player because it's clear he wants to play professionally just despite the 4+ years of setbacks at this point. And he's just a guy you're kind of rooting for in his way out of Cleveland. Like there's no bad feelings or hard feelings whatsoever. It's just the Cavs had to move on at some point because they're just kind of burning a roster spot for a guy who could just never stay healthy.
Yeah, it's I mean the Knicks have certainly had some guys like that of their own in recent years, Kevin Knox, Cam Reddish, various guys that just kind of, they came in, they maybe showed some stuff and then it was just like, yeah, but ultimately it's kind of just time to move on right now because things just aren't working the way that you want them to work with this guy. And, in those two guys' case with the Knicks, it was more about like what skills they were bringing or how well or not well they mesh with Tibbs or, whatever the case may be. But sometimes, you just reach that point where even if there is some potential there, you kind of just have to cut bait as a team. I want to talk more about his actual skill set in the next segment and, kind of get a feel for in the limited minutes that he did get in the NBA, what he was able to show, maybe things that don't show out necessarily in those stats, because it is tough to tell, especially with like rookie year stats, that there's going to be ups and downs. And sometimes it's hard to just look at a stat sheet and say, oh, all right, well, this guy stunk, but obviously maybe he showed something more than that at that next level. But I do want to real quick remind everybody that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. And you could take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over under to who you think is going to hit the first home run, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on the MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And I've been telling people to not bet on the Mets or maybe bet against the Mets, my favorite baseball team. Evan, how confidence level 1 to 10 real quick. If they were to bet on the Guardians, what do you think?
Scale 1 to 10, I give it a solid 5 because they're a perfectly average team.
All right.
So, the most milquetoast answer I can give for the most just completely average baseball team in terms of just on-field production. I laugh because I pity you as a Mets fan. I have several Mets fans in my life, and I know this year has been rough for them.
I would kill for milquetoast and mediocre right now, let me just say. But what's not milquetoast and mediocre is, of course, FanDuel. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, and we're back in, continuing talking about Dylan Windler. And, I got to say, I came out of that first segment feeling I guess a little better than I thought I would about Windler. It sort of seemed to me like, my initial read on him, and I think Gavin's as well, like we both sort of like almost like wrote him off in segments this week of like, whatever, maybe he works out. The college stats are good. If he can get back there, then cool. But we're kind of looking at his NBA production and sort of similar to what you said, I guess, like the injuries stand out a lot, or it's just like, this guy can't find the floor. But I guess if I was going to zero in on one particular season, and I know you said he played in Canton for a bit, which is cool. Although I have such a hard time trusting G League stats anymore. Like, Deuce McBride on the Knicks, for example, went down there and played like 7-8 games and averaged like 32 points per game and like shot like 46% from three and all this other stuff. Like, I mean, the dude is insane. So, it's definitely a weird song and dance with trying to use G League production to predict NBA production. But his rookie year on the books, the first year that he was able to play, I think was the one where I seem to remember that was the post-COVID, or not post-COVID, but during COVID season, the first, season where they were playing with the empty arenas and everything. I know that sort of inflated some people's numbers. And in the case of Windler, he shot like 34% from three, I think, that year, which to me, I'm like, for a shooter, I don't know if that necessarily inspires a ton of confidence because everybody else was getting a bump and shooting like 40%, but he was a rookie. And I seem to remember I don't remember a stat line or anything. Maybe I should have looked it up ahead of time, but I seem to remember him cooking the Knicks that year in one of those games, but maybe I'm just misremembering things. But I don't know. What was sort of your takeaway on his game? I know you said he wanted to end up a Joe Ingles type of guy. Did you ever see flashes where he did look like that? Because
Yeah.
the Knicks sort of find themselves in this weird position this year where, I mean, they just signed Nathan Knight as well, who's on the other two-way deal. 2 out of the 3 are filled by guys that I think could reasonably find some time with the Knicks this year, and Windler and Knight. They definitely need a backup power forward, but as it stands right now, it looks like they're probably going to play kind of small, which would potentially cater to a guy like a Windler like that if he does indeed have that in his game. I mean, did you see that sort of pie in the sky vision of his game show through at all during those couple years?
So he played one game against the Knicks in that like pre/post COVID empty arena era, and he had, I'm looking at the stats now because I was curious myself, because I'm like, yeah, he had a few moments you're like, okay, he could be something. And also, again, he, like you said, he was a rookie, so it's not like things are going to translate instantaneously, but like shooting wise against the Knicks, he was 3 of 5 from the floor, 2 of 4 from 3-point range. He had 8 points, 3 turnovers, 1 steal, 1 block, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists in that game. So like a little bit of just everything.
That sounds about right.
By 29 in that game, but
Yeah.
Either way, like that Cavs team wasn't very good. But for Windler at this juncture, like you said, like it's hard to get like a full scope of what a guy can be in the G League. Like I think like in your case, like Deuce McBride, he's kind of like in that weird similar spot to like Sam Merrill in the Cavs, where he's probably too good for the G League, but he's just not good enough to crack an NBA rotation on the night-to-night basis. Like he's just like a break glass in case of emergency type player, or you're either getting blown out or blowing an opponent out, and he can get some burn on the floor that way. But just like based on what Windler was as a player this season, I'm trying to pull up the stats because I thought it was this year. Okay, well, I may have been wrong on this one, but there was a game not too long ago where Windler just like had like where it just seemed like everything clicked for him all of a sudden. You're like, okay, despite all the frustrations and all like the trials and tribulations and just everything that he went through as a player, like you could tell, like, okay, this is probably just like the best moment you'll ever get from Dylan Windler, just because he is a guy that, again, struggled to get onto the floor on a night-to-night basis. And he's and now as I'm looking at Dylan Windler, just like searching my Twitter history, it's just Dylan Windler's out for tonight's game against so-and-so. So there's just like moments where you can see the vision, and yeah, the Joe Ingles flashes were there, especially as he maybe just got more comfortable playing against NBA level talent and just kind of figuring out what his size was. But like, even if the G League stats don't stick out, like the rebounding stuff stood out right away, whether that was his quote unquote rookie season, when it was technically the second year of his contract, like he was making an impact crashing the glass, and then instead of maybe like looking for like hunting for shots or things like that, he was looking to make the right pass. And there's just small things like that where like, okay, he can be a bit of a glue guy and a guy who can make a bit of an impact on the floor against teams on like a nightly basis. And I remember the game now. It was 2 years ago rather. The Cavs were playing the Atlanta Hawks, and Dylan Windler got a spot start because of how banged up the Cavs were. In about 22 minutes, he was 5 of 5 from 3-point range, 5 of 6 from the floor. So he had 17 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. Like, it's a lot of everything there. And you're like, oh yeah, wow, maybe Dylan Windler can finally turn the corner and finally put this all together. He suffered an injury setback in practice the next day. So like, that's the issue. And if you can squeeze from some blood from the stone or some juice from like whatever's left of this fruit, and Dylan Windler is 26, I believe. So it's kind of make or break time for him unless he maybe sticks in the G League or goes overseas. But right now, like if you're the Knicks and you're like considering your options, like using your 2-way contracts to maybe add a guy who could have a little bit of juice or something. At least it's like a training camp invite or something like that. And like if it doesn't work out, you can easily cut him, sign a different guy to a 2-way deal, and you look elsewhere. Or maybe he spends more time with the Westchester Knicks and he just keeps getting on court reps. Maybe becomes more familiar with New York's system, especially what they run offensively. And maybe he can become that guy who's too good for the G League, but maybe not good enough for nightly rotation minutes, and it's just because of the injury concerns, I think, at this point, and just like that, it just stunted his development and growth so much as a player, especially considering he was a senior coming out of college. But like you look at that, you're thinking, okay, maybe there is a path for him to become not the Joe Ingles type player, but a guy who can provide you solid two-way play. He can make the right read and the right pass. He can provide you some spacing and just rebounding. And he doesn't play 15, 20, 30 minutes a night, but he's a guy who gives you like 10, 15 minutes. Like I joked with a buddy, I said it would kill Cavs fans so much to watch like Dylan Windler and Josh Hart just continue to eat up offensive boards that the Cavs ran into the Knicks in the playoffs again. Like it's moments like that because he just has like that uncanny knack to grab offensive boards, and like he can be an impact player like that because New York's such a good rebounding team. But you, like I said, you're just rooting for him at this point. You're hoping he can become a bit more of like a role player, or at least just find a path to consistently stick with an NBA team. And maybe New York's his chance, or maybe it's some other team that he finds a shot with, or maybe he goes overseas, finally just gets enough experience and just kind of comes back or retires. I don't know. It's like Dylan Windler is always going to be a bit of an enigma for Cavs fans. I think they already gave out his jersey number to somebody else, so it's pretty clear they moved on pretty quickly. But it was number 9. The last guy to wear it before him was Dwayne Wade, so there was like the DW jokes right there too with the Cavs. But either way, like Windler, again, he's a guy you just want to root for, and he does show like flashes like that Ingles like upside, but like it's just really hard for him to have like consistent nightly levels of play like that. We're like, okay, he can put together like a 5 to 10 game stretch of this, and you're thinking, okay, maybe he can turn the corner, but he'll have like a great moment, and then just life gets in the way for him every single time, and it's tragic in that sense.
Yeah, hopefully he's able to just stay healthy just through practice and whatnot, and then able to be ready. Because I do think, I hope that there's not a ton of opportunities for him this year, to be completely honest, unless he really shows out. Because if he gets an opportunity with the big Knicks, it's most likely means that like one of RJ Barrett or Josh Hart or someone of that nature has gotten hurt, which would open up a potential for him to have to like slot in for a few minutes if he's really showing out in practice. But that said, I mean, it would make me pretty happy for the Knicks to find a steal, with a two-way contract of all things, which, now at this point, the two-way deals are just so unprohibitive at this point that it's almost like getting free extra roster spots to try people out. I think that would be pretty fantastic. So I'm rooting for him as well. I hope that he works out very well for the Knicks. But one other guy that maybe this is way too for something. Maybe that will work out well for the Knicks in the future. I guess we'll see. Would potentially be Donovan Mitchell. And there's been some weird talk going on this whole offseason. And I thought that it would be an interesting note to close on. Talk a little bit about Donovan Mitchell and where both the Knicks and Cavs find themselves right now. So we'll take our final little break here and then come back in and talk about some Donovan Mitchell talk in a sec. All right, we're back in, continuing our little chit chat here, Knicks and Cavs style. And Evan, I got to throw it to you, dude. What's going on with Donovan Mitchell right now? I feel like there's been some very weird talk. I think it was Tim McMahon, with ESPN, that was on a podcast the other day that was like, if I were the Cavs, I would just trade him to the Knicks now because that's where he's going. And that's like all he cares to do. And then there's been other chitter chatter like that going on. And even as early as like, I was starting to hear that stuff like last season, even like by like the playoffs, like, oh, well, Mitchell might just go to the Knicks. I got to wonder where the Knicks heads are at, and maybe we'll talk about that in a second, in regards to like, I think if Mitchell wanted to go to the Knicks, he should have made that a little bit more of a point last year rather than like kind of being wishy-washy about it and being like, well, I'll just do whatever, like lightly implying like, I would like to go to the Knicks, but also I'll play wherever, you know what I mean? If he felt that strongly about it, I almost wish he would have said so, because the Knicks are now setting themselves up to not really be a cap space team going forward, which makes, the whole situation a little more hairy. But we'll talk about that in a second. I mean, how are things feeling in Cleveland right now? I feel like I know Knicks fans have been going insane this offseason with, reclaiming a little bit of success. How are things in Cleveland right now as far as the fan base and media and everything else?
So I think the fan base is still licking their wounds after the playoff loss to New York. I think you can be frank, like the Cavs got embarrassed by New York. Like they didn't show up besides game 2, like game 3 and game 4. It was clear the Garden just rattled them quite a bit. And then game 5, they just completely laid down and just kind of surrendered to New York. Donovan Mitchell clearly wasn't himself. You could say it's the groin, you could say it's other stuff, but like this Cavs team just wasn't itself in the postseason. And I think it's fair to question what you have with this team, whether it's from coaching or from a player standpoint. But like the fact that Cleveland went out and just got some more shooting talent, whether it's Max Strus or George Niang or even Ty Jerome as well, and like the Cavs have had a pretty solid offseason. I do think the cloud hanging over it all is what's going to happen with Donovan Mitchell. I think a lot of fans just have PTSD from what's happened with LeBron twice now, whether it's him going to Miami the first time around and just like the weird pomp and circumstance of that, or him just exiting the stage right after a pretty rough final season in Cleveland where like the Cavs just kind of were cratered and they had to rip it down to the root at that point. But I always tell people we shouldn't probably put the cart in front of the horse. In terms of the McMahon stuff, like I feel like this is just like peak off season. Like, hey, there's not a lot to talk about, so let's just kind of roll the dice and we'll talk about the Knicks and how Donovan Mitchell is clearly a fan of New York basketball. He probably empathizes with you quite a bit in terms of just how badly the Mets are torturing him this season, but more than that, like I just think it's like just endless speculation. Kobe Altman was on the record saying like they are going to do everything they can to convince Donovan to stay here long term, whether it's a more of a shorter term extension, he can re-enter free agency maybe before he passes his quote unquote peak just because he's a smaller guard, or there's just some way they have to go about this. Like Sean Devaney from Heavy wrote at length not too long ago, I want to say about 10 days ago at this point, as of when we're recording this, that the Cavs are shifting their focus a little bit to make Donovan Mitchell feel like this is his team. Like he apparently kind of told the front office that Max Strus is a guy he admires. George Niang is a guy he was really close with in Utah that they brought in because that was one of his former teammates and one of his guys. And like it's weird. Like I just think it's weird because Cleveland fans got really sensitive to him wearing a Mets jersey, but they don't realize the fact that his dad's worked for the Mets Donovan's entire life. So gotta take it where you can. Like I thought it was corny that he wore like a half Guardians, half Mets jersey for either All Star or some type of promo photo shoot. I'm just like, guys, athletes are allowed to have interests. They are human beings too. They don't have to live, breathe, and eat Cleveland every chance they get. But we'll see what happens. I've always been of the mentality, and I tell our listeners, and my co-host Chris Manning says the same thing, that if he makes it clear and he's in the final year of his contract, quote unquote, that he's not going to pick up that player option, or even if he does pick up that player option, he just doesn't plan on re-signing with Cleveland. If you're the Cavs, yeah, then you explore the conversation of trading him. And I think that's just like maybe a conversation you have and you remain in constant communication with one another. But it takes two to tango. Like I think that Donovan Mitchell has definitely shown the Cavs that like, hey, I was worth everything you paid for. Like I'm sure people maybe have some sticker shock still, just with what marketing's becoming, and like you have to take that with a grain of salt though, because the Jazz were not a good team. Like Colin Sexton, Ochai Agbaji, and et cetera and so on. Like I think marketing is in a better situation now that he's the number one option. Maybe found some comfort after being damaged by Jim Boylan quite a bit, but right now, like the Cavs are clearly trying to build a winner. That's what I mean. It takes two to tango. Like the Cavs also have to prove to Donovan Mitchell, like, hey, what we're building here is working. It's sustainable. We have two young stars like that are part of the foreseeable future in Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. Jared Allen is the fourth banana, and unfortunately maybe the fall guy if they have to make a dramatic shakeup. But like the Cavs have a lot of young pieces. They clearly zeroed in on shooting because that was an issue they've had all year long. Not even before the postseason. Just like add more viable players. They signed Karis LeVert to a pretty good deal as well. Like the Cavs made a lot of moves just to kind of show to Donovan Mitchell that they're committed to building a winning team around him, because you could feel his frustration when the season ended, when he was walking away from the podium and he said, I'm sorry guys, I'll see you next year. Then he stopped and sat back down and said, I am sick and tired of after the end of every first round or after the end of every second round that I'll say, I'll see you guys next year and hopefully we do better. He's like, I want to win. I want to win championships. I want to be great. And it's not like Joel Embiid being tongue in cheek about winning a championship with Philly or somewhere else. Like Mitchell seems fairly committed to this team and this organization. It's just, again, let's just see how this plays out. And this conversation could change dramatically between now and this time next year, of course. And like, we could be having a completely different talk. But as you had mentioned, like, I just don't know if the Knicks would really be like in the running for it because, like you said, they're going to be a cap team soon, and you have a really good thing going. Like you have a lot of young stars on your team, and maybe you wait to cash in your assets on like a bigger fish at this point. But like you keep Donovan Mitchell more as like not a consolation prize, but like he's like your second or third option if like you strike out on like a Joel Embiid or shoot, even if like Giannis just becomes so frustrated and he wants to go to New York for some reason. Like the Knicks maybe want to keep the powder dry for like bigger names than that, and then like Mitchell's like your third or fourth choice.
Yeah, I think it's becoming an interesting song and dance with the Knicks at this point because for the last like few years, and some fans would be like, "Come on, like make a move already. What are you doing? You know, like what are you hoarding all of these players for, and blah blah blah, and all these picks, and you know, eventually they're going to lapse." And I agree with that to a degree. However, I do think that they find themselves in a much better place this year than had they decided to pull the trigger and make that move last year. And like, I can remember even immediately after the Mitchell trade went down, I said, you know what? Considering what it costs to get him, that was a much better move for Cleveland than it was for the Knicks. And then obviously the Knicks, overperformed expectations this year. Like I would say by a wide margin. I mean, nobody, myself included, was like, this team is going to like win a first round series this year and make it to the second round and potentially push. I mean, really, they pushed the eventual Eastern Conference champions fairly hard, like almost as hard as they got pushed in the entire postseason, which is crazy. So like, I think that they sort of find themselves now in a better position to make this sort of move for a Donovan Mitchell type player than they were last year. And yet if he became available tomorrow, like you just said, it sort of almost feels like there might be bigger fish to fry coming up, which is crazy to say, cause like, I don't want to, it feels very like old Knicks to always be looking at like, oh, well, if so-and-so becomes available, then he might be a Knick. And if so-and-so, if LeBron, just wait on LeBron in 2010 or wait on Durant in 2019 or, whatever, like, that seems to always be the case. And yet this time it feels a little more real because as you noted, like the Knicks finally have this nice bedrock set up of, Brunson. Like I'm seeing a lot of people, like, especially even like in our YouTube comments and stuff, like, and on Twitter, whatever, like people already are trying to like forget just how good he was this year. But like he proved that he could legitimately be the number one scoring option on a title team this past year, I think, at least to me. I mean, he went out there and like night to night, it was like, we need you to get 32 points, whatever, like tonight, right now. And if you don't do that, we're not going to win this game. And he just was like, all right, I could do that, against literally any defender, any team, against the Heat, against the Cavs, whoever you throw at him. He pretty much just finds his way to get his points. You run into
It is interesting. Like,
where
does, in your opinion, like, I agree, like, Jalen was such a great signing by the Knicks last offseason. And just like they made it, I mean, it was written in the stars, whether it's the hiring of his dad or just like the fact that he pretty clearly wants to be there. And like the Nova Knicks are going to be fun. And I'm going to ask you this, like, cause I'm high on them too. Number one option on a title team is definitely interesting, though. Like how the Eastern Conference is shaking up, like where does he rank amongst just like Eastern point guards? Because like Darius Garland's up there, but like Jalen Brunson did pick him apart and bully him quite a bit in the playoffs.
Yeah, to be clear, I think of him as a number one scoring option, on a title team potentially, and that's because I think that like I feel like he would be the number one scorer, but you would need to have someone else on the team that you could point to and say no, but like on both ends in the cumulative of it all, this guy is better than Jalen Brunson. But like Jalen Brunson is the guy, like let's just say like and I understand that like Giannis, for example, is always the alpha and omega or whatever in the Milwaukee conversation, but like a guy that you could point to like a Chris Middleton, like, which I think Brunson is better than like Middleton, it's so hard to compare them because they play completely different positions. But, like on the overall, I would say that I think that Brunson is better than a Middleton, but Middleton is so often that guy that like if Giannis can't get a bucket because they're like walling off the inside and saying, make someone else beat us, Middleton's always that guy that they can just kind of like hand the ball to and be like, go make a bucket because we need it. And I think that Brunson is that level of guy that could be on a title team and just be the guy that you hand the ball to and say, we need points right now. Go do it.
He's got that dog in him. Like
he does.
If you ask him to go do something, he will put his entire mind, heart, body, and soul on the line to try and help your team win. Like I this may drive some of my listeners nuts, but like that Knicks team was super endearing in just how they play, and Brunson is definitely like the heart and soul of that team. Like the Hart deserves a lot of credit too for just how much he just like bullied the Cavs off the bench. But like when Brunson just like puts it all on the line like that, and also the fact that, like he's the team's best player, like that just kind of speaks ethos about how fun, young, and scrappy this team could be for New York.
Yeah, and then to answer your question about where he ranks as far as a point guard in the East, I mean,
he's one or two in my opinion, just because there's been such an exodus of guards out of the East already.
Just in the East, I mean, it's like who are you even like you? I guess the class of the East would have to be him, Drew Holiday, Garland, Trae Young. However you feel about him. It's tough to throw like LaMelo up there.
Yeah.
That's
the weird thing.
Yeah, because like he can't, he's had his own durability issues and stuff like that. So
I think the conversation does flip if the Heat are able to land Dame, and I think Dame certainly leapfrogs a lot of these guys just because he's like such a nuclear level threat, and I think in Miami like he'll just be even better at this point in his career. But like a lot of people question like, hey, the Knicks are committing all this money to a dude who had like who just shredded Donovan Mitchell with the Mavs in the playoffs, and he's playing next to Luka and all these other like talented players. Like he's not that good. Like no, he proved his worth, and he definitely backed up like why the Knicks kind of made him their most sought after free agent last year. And I think he is up there in like the top 3 conversation for now. Like because again, like I agree. Like how do you feel about Trae? But Brunson is just like he has that back. He can back it up, and so that's what makes New York scary, because like their best player is also just like one of the best players at his position overall in the conference, and that's going to be making it really fun just going forward.
Yeah, and lest I forget, I realized I left one name off the list, the max contract man himself, Tyrese Halliburton, as well. So I guess that he counts as well. Although I would say Brunson's better than him too, and probably should have made the All-Star team over him this year.
Hallie I'm high on, but I want to see what this Pacers team does now that there's expectations, and he's definitely their contract guy now. So
yeah, exactly. So anyway, it'll make for an interesting year. We were talking before the show, but like the Knicks and Cavs are sort of just much like I think the Knicks and Hawks were sort of intrinsically linked a couple years ago after that playoff series. With all the ties, I think you and I are going to be talking quite a bit more throughout these next couple of years because it's just a very intriguing little intersection of two teams right now as far as where they are, what their expectations are. One particularly large player that looms over the whole thing, and Donovan Mitchell and all that stuff. So, but for now, I think we could probably wrap up. Evan, thanks so much for popping on and talking with me, giving me the scoop on the newest Knick. I definitely feel a little better about Windler going forward. But yeah, I think this will be an interesting season for both teams, and hopefully a prosperous one again, because I think this has potential to be a fun little rivalry for the next few years.
I think so too. It won't be like Hicks versus Knicks in the 90s, but it has the potential to have some intrigue and drama both on and off the court. And yeah, it would be fun to see these teams open up the season against each other, because I think there could be some animosity between the two, just because like the Cavs were probably going to try and come out with a chip on their shoulder, and the Knicks may just bully them again. So we'll see how it goes, though.
That we shall. But until next time, thank you everybody for listening from both sides of this crossover podcast. And of course, check out our feed, Locked On Knicks, on YouTube, your favorite podcast provider, or the Locked On Cavs feed for more Cavs content. But until next time, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you soon together or separately. Peace out, everybody.